All right, welcome, folks. We're going to let people stream in here. Broadcasting from San Diego, California. We're getting pummeled with rain. So if you hear something in the background, that's what it is. All right, folks. Well, welcome to This Clinical Life. My name is Stephen Beeson. I'm a family medicine physician and founder of Practicing Excellence, and really excited. I mean, I'm excited about all episodes, but I'm particularly excited about this episode. We have Dr. Stephen Trzeciak, who's co-author of Compassionomics and co-author of Wonder Drug, the Wonder Drug. And I've been a follower and a fan and an advocate and a champion and a student of Stephen for many years, and greatly appreciate the work that he's done. And I'll do a brief introduction here. But Dr. Trzeciak most importantly, is a practicing critical care physician. He is what he refers to as a research nerd, highly published researcher with, I think, 120 publications over the course of your career. Is also chair of medicine at Cooper University with about 350 faculty. And has become a fierce advocate for compassion in healthcare and compassion in a wider aperture in the human experience, which is a beautiful endeavor. So, Stephen, welcome.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So let me begin with this. We as clinicians are not awesome at compassion always. Why is that, do you think?
So I think it's a combination of things. One is that although we're trying to undo this to some extent, people view compassion as a nice to have. So if you have, in other words, like the cherry on top of the sundae, or the dessert after the entree, right? So if you also have a compassionate connection, it may just provide a little extra rather than being fundamental to health and health care. And so I think that we relegate it sometimes in our mind to a domain that is not essential. That's in a nutshell what I think is at the root of the problem.
You know, it's interesting. And as we went through our training, you know, we received extensive training on, creating differential diagnoses of physical examination and testing against those diagnoses and deploying evidence-based treatment to advance recovery and wellness. Rarely was compassion included in that intervention to accelerate healing and recovery. But now, through the work of you and others, compassion is making a profound impact on clinical recovery. I would love to hear your perspective on, first of all, we're not great at it, and we'll cover that data, but I would love to hear your opinion as to what do we see as the impact of compassion in the delivery of care from your perspective?
So Dr. Maz and I, that's my colleague and co-author, Anthony Mazzarelli, we like to look at familiar things in unfamiliar ways. So in this case, compassion, rather than examining it through a moral ethical lens or an emotional sentimental lens, we examine compassion through the lens of science. And we look at the scientific evidence that compassion makes differences that are not just meaningful, because that's the intuitive way that compassion matters, but also measurable, that it moves the needle in measurable ways for patients and for patient care and for those who care for patients. Now you said that, we're not great at it. Well, some of us are. Nurses, for example, are great at it because there's, in their training, it is viewed as essential part of the quality of nursing care. I mean, although, for example, in one of our books, Compassionomics, there are over 250 original science research papers. And in the nursing domain, they didn't need that to understand how vital it was, right? So some of us are really good at it, and some physicians too. I personally am a work in progress. And so it was curating all the scientific evidence that changed my mind about the power of compassion for others. And it's not a heart story. I said changed my mind. I don't think that of all your the viewers today, those joining us on the podcast, I would imagine that if they've tuned in to this, they have their heart in the right place. It's not a heart story. And in synthesizing all the evidence for compassionomics, we're not trying to change anybody's heart because it's already in the right place. But what we do hope to do is change people's minds. When you see the evidence that compassion makes measurable differences, you think differently. You think differently about your opportunities to treat people with compassion.
One of the things that I'm curious about, and the evidence that is referenced in both Compassionomics and the Wonder Drug is very, very compelling. And you built what we call the data bomb. The data bomb was when Maz, Anthony Mazzarelli, who was the youngest CMO at Cooper University, wanted to tap the biggest nerd that he knew, which apparently was you.
I take it as a compliment, by the way.
No, it's great. And he said, Steve, we want to be able to harvest the evidence that we can create a compelling data argument for academic medical center to deploy an effort to raise the compassion. And you reference kind of what you found in terms of measurable impact in outcomes of patients. Tell me a little bit about what that data bomb did to convince your academic medical center to deploy efforts to advance compassion where you were.
So after in telling you this part of the story, I'm not suggesting cause and effect because there's associations here, and I'm not suggesting that because we pushed all this evidence together and put it together in a digestible way that it's what moved the needle. I like to think that it's really the other way around, that it was the environment here at Cooper, here in Camden, New Jersey. It's that environment that's really had an influence on me rather than the other way around, because we've had, for example, focus groups like, consumer groups evaluating people that live in our catchment area. When you first think of Cooper, what comes to your mind? And the first two things were compassion and caring. When we asked the same question of all physician leaders, the number one thing that rose to the top was compassion. When we asked the nurses, and not just nursing leaders, but everybody, and you're probably familiar with a word cloud where like the most frequently suggested term gets the biggest and comes to the middle, it was compassion. And so it was right around the time that we were synthesizing all the evidence and it was getting some attention. I think it's bidirectional. I think our work has had an effect on the organization, but the organization and the culture that we have here has definitely had an effect on us, no doubt about it. The data bomb, as you said, and we do like that framing, has been helpful in convincing people, and when I say people, I mean me, and as well as others, that there's as much evidence for treating people with compassion as any pill you took this morning or any surgery you may be planning to have. What the research points to is that compassion for others and the human connection that flows from that has physiological effects, there's psychological effects, or effects on quality of care and on patient self-care. That's one of the most tangible and one of the most practical, if you will. So, for example, ample evidence shows that if you care deeply about patients and they know it, they feel it, they're more likely to take their medicine. They're more likely to follow treatment recommendations. They're more likely to buy in to whatever plan or vision you have for their health. And we all know that patients' behavior is a very powerful determinant of health. And so, that's just some examples of what we're able to uncover with all this data.
One of the things that I found to be most resonating about the Wonder Drug in particular is the impact of helping others and giving to others and having compassion for others to the giver of compassion.
Sure.
Talk,
So,
talk a little bit about
mhm.
that and sort of what you saw emerge as a result of efforts consistent with giving compassion to others.
So it's where the science meets the personal for me. So I'm an intensivist, and as many of your listeners know, that means you frequently meet patients and their families on what's often the worst day of their life. And after 20 plus years of doing that, I became very much aware of the fact that I had every symptom of burnout myself, every single one. And so, what was I supposed to do? The conventional self care teaching was get away more, take more vacations, do more yoga, take walks in nature by yourself, or put on your headphones and listen to your meditation app and block out the world. And for me, that just didn't compute, because to me that was like escapism,
Mhm.
and it just didn't make sense to me. I thought that something had to fundamentally change at the point of care. And that's when Dr. Maz and I were doing all of our research on compassionomics. And what we found is that there was a very clear signal that compassion has measurable beneficial effects for the giver too, not just the receiver, but the giver. And if it's one thing that we found in that work, specifically in the healthcare care domain, or as you mentioned, Wonder Drug, that's really the message for everybody everywhere. If there's one message that we found in all of that work together, it's that the key to resilience is relationships. And the key to resilience is relationships. And that's not just a healthcare worker thing, it's broadly across the psychology domain. And so when I was confronted with burnout, and I did what I call my N of one experiment. So I decided I was going to test the compassion hypothesis for myself and care more, not less, and lean in more rather than detach and escape. And that was when the fog of burnout began to lift for me. But it wasn't just patients and families in the ICU. It was connecting with the nurses that I'd worked with for like 15 plus years at that point, with my trainees, with my colleagues, and even at home. And the key to resilience is relationships. So when you lean into those relationships and you get the deeper relationships that flow from that, that's when the fog of burnout can begin to lift for you too, if you find yourself in that place. And we got messages from people far and wide saying, I decided to test a compassion hypothesis for myself and I got the same results. I had the same experience. And so that's what led us to the work that you described in Wonder Drug, where we said, wait a minute, this can't just be true for healthcare workers. It can't just be people who put on scrubs and go work in a hospital every day. There must be like a common thread, or perhaps even a universal. And that's where, when we curated all the evidence, that not compassion in the context of a sick patient, but just in general, out in the world around us and serving others, whether you use the word altruism, serving others, even kindness, basically getting out of your own head and focusing on other people rather than ourselves. What are the effects of that? And so again, and we another 250 original science research papers later, we found that outside the healthcare domain, in real life, everyday people, that serving others can be the best medicine for yourself. And there are physical effects, psychological effects, mental health, happiness and well-being, even professional success. And so this is now what we try to incorporate into everything, whether it's teaching, parenting, everything.
It's we have very, very similar stories. And I have to tell you that for me personally, as a family medicine physician who was assigned a task to improve the experience of patients in a group that was struggling on that domain and concurrently was struggling with the engagement of clinicians. My N of one was doing things that allowed me to more deeply connect and help and support and be there for my patients. And it was life-saving and life-changing for me. So much so
Mhm.
that my personal opinion, and I think the literature is now verifying this, including our own publications from Practicing Excellence, is that when we impact the lives of patients that allow us to be the clinicians that we've always aspired to be, and with feedback loops from patients of you have made a difference for me.
Mhm.
First of all, it's completely accessible. There's nothing that we have to wait for to allow us to be that clinician.
That's
And
right.
when we do that, we get these pulses of oxytocin, these pulses of dopamine that represent the richest of human experiences
Mhm.
that is very difficult to describe. And so my N of one was when I was better for patients, it changed my life. And then I saw it replicated with almost every single clinician that I help and support along the journey of how can we become better for the patients that we serve, for their benefit, for the group benefit. Yes, yes, yes. But mostly my passion was how do we live a clinical life that allows us to say, this is what I thought it was going to be. And that's exactly what you describe and what you verified with all of your data. And so,
I love the way you framed it, accessible.
mhm,
Um, another way that we sometimes frame it is start small,
right,
right? It's just like little micro acts of compassion, whether it's the patient that you're treating, or it could just be a colleague in your workplace, even the people who live under your own roof. I mean, to be what we call a live to giver, you don't
right,
have to um, quit your job and sell all your worldly possessions and move to a third world country to treat
right,
patients,
right,
in a you can just start with the people right in your orbit. One of my favorite studies is a study from the University of Toronto that we covered in Wonder Drug, where in everyday life, regular people have this is not clinicians, by the way. This is just like regular people. 9 empathy opportunities every day. And if you think about that, yeah, it makes me work. Like, how many did I miss this morning? Already. And so we're surrounded by opportunities. We just need to open our eyes to them. In the clinical environment, they're everywhere, of course.
right. You and I want to speak about that a little bit, where the difference between what we as clinicians think we do in the process of self-assessment and the expression of compassion and what we actually do as seen by patients, because the patients
Mm,
are the ultimate determiner of were we compassionate or not. Us saying, I was compassionate, I responded to patients' fear, worries, and concern. Yes, thumbs up for me. That's not the determinant. It's whether the patient felt cared for
that's right.
about. So talk a little bit about the literature between what we think we do and what we actually do in terms of compassion, particularly for clinicians and by clinicians.
So for clinicians, there is evidence that physicians specifically have a blind spot. And in one of the most interesting studies, they measured compassion from the patient's perspective, from the physician's perspective, and from a nurse's perspective that was also involved in the care of the patient. And the nurse and the patient agreed like almost 100% of the time, and the physician's assessment of their own compassion was frequently way off. So, what the evidence shows specifically for physicians is that we often have a blind spot, and that's why assessing patients' experience is so important. to get their perspective on how we're doing. And for example, we have a 5-item compassion measure. It's very simple. It just asks questions about, did they show concern for your personal needs? Were they able to gain your trust, and things like that. If we don't consider those to be very important indices of the quality of care, then we've got deeper problems, because especially as it relates to trust, because patients have to often tell us some of their most intimate secrets, things they don't tell anybody else. And so, what the data support is that we often need help, even though we may not be aware of it.
Another interesting data point, there was an interesting article that I'm sure you've seen in the orthopedic literature where patients assess the quality of the care that they received.
Mhm.
And they had all sorts of different objective measures of things that they could assess: wait time, preoperative delay, scars post-surgery, all these different measures.
Mhm.
And by far the greatest correlate, and about 65% of the variance, was the degree of empathy and compassion by the clinician for them was far and away the greatest driver of how patients perceive their care. And so there's tremendous benefit in terms of physical recovery, as you had mentioned, and is so well articulated in Compassionomics. It is the definition of how patients rate their care. They cared about me there in a real, authentic, and witnessable way. And it is life-changing for those that are providing care. So, you have these three legs of power of compassion, and you wonder why it's still not a central cultural trait for all organizations looking to become culturally better. So that is a little bit of context. I'm curious, if you were to guide leaders
Mhm.
who are interested in, we want to become a compassionate organization, compassion
Mhm.
for our patients, for our communities, for each other, as leaders, as teammates, for ourselves, what would you advise in terms of beginning the change process of becoming a highly compassionate organization?
I love the question. Dr. Maz and I spend a lot of time thinking about this. We wrote an article in Harvard Business Review recently called Leading with Compassion
Hmm.
that has some of the principles there. I think, and while what I'm about to say may seem intuitive to some extent, that if we want more compassionate cultures, we have to treat the people in our charge with more compassion. So leaders need to become more compassionate themselves. And that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I need to say is that while the data published in Health Affairs, for example, from Harvard Medical School, found that 46% of Americans believe not only that our healthcare system is not compassionate, but that our healthcare providers are not compassionate either. While there's ample evidence that there are gaps where we're falling short, we have to also acknowledge that there are unintended consequences that have contributed to this. So, for example, the electronic health record is vitally important for the quality of care. There's no doubt about it, but there is abundant evidence that clinicians spend more time looking into computer screens and looking their patients in the eyes. I personally, and most everything I can share with you, I have references for. This is just my opinion. This part is, I think that's a public health problem because our patients will need to divulge their most personal secrets. How are they going to feel comfortable doing that if the physician never even looks at them in the eyes? So it's an unintended consequence of an advance in electronic health records. So how do we get around that? Or I actually think that the answer is more technology, not less. And so we're using systems right now that actually will write the notes for the doctor. Don't ask me how it works because I have no idea. And I honestly, I
Right,
don't even I don't care, to be honest with
right.
you. but it writes it listens, and it can tell the difference between chit chat and medical stuff somehow. I don't know. And it writes a note. And so the clinicians can spend what Dr. Maz and I call eyeball time, looking their patients in the eyes. It's not just better for the patients and for the quality of care, it's better for the clinicians as well, whether they're nurses,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
technicians, doctors, whoever they are. It's vital for everybody. So I think that leaders need to treat their folks with more compassion, and it starts there. But also, we need to engineer our systems and our technologies in ways that promote human connection rather than detract from it.
It's really interesting when you talk about leading with compassion and the downstream impact, because I think it's very hard for exhausted healthcare workers to deploy compassion as an effort when they feel they're getting top down, micromanaged, and held accountable for metrics.
Mhm.
And that is their day-to-day experience
Totally.
within work. And then for them to de novo in the context of exhaustion and depersonalization and cynicism to say, I am going to rise up and express compassion for the patient in front of me is not going to consistently create compassion as an organizational trait in the absence of leaders who show great compassion. And compassion is, to see suffering and a desire to help.
Totally. And I would add that leaders need to spend tons of time working on improving operations, because you can't carry your way out of bad operations.
Right. Right.
And so if the systems, we need to engineer it in a way that strips away, to the extent possible, the things that don't add value to that relationship, and allow doctors to be doctors and nurses to be nurses and look their patients in the eyeballs and actually talk to them rather than typing in a computer or doing other
Right.
activities, to systems and operations that will maximize opportunities for human connection rather than just detract from it.
And I think compassionate leaders, that's the substrate and dependency and condition for them to deploy the effort to deburden the care team to allow them to express
Absolutely.
compassion, right? If they don't have compassion, then they're going to say, whatever, just do your job, we're paying you. Shut up and do your stuff, right? But a compassionate leader would say, we have to deburden this team. We got to find
That's right.
technologies and innovations for them to have the breadth to be the healers that we know that they should be. And
Yes.
compassion is a precursor to that effort to deburden. So anyway, one of the other things that I think is really interesting that I sort of read through the lines in the Wonder Drug is compassion for each other. And
Mhm.
so it's compassion for patients, compassion as leaders, and compassion for teammates. And how important that is to say, if we're going to become a compassionate organization, we have to be compassionate leaders as a leadership trait that's highly visible. We have to be compassionate for each other, to help each other, support each other, lift each other, be there for each other, and to cry together sometimes. And when those two things are in place, our capacity to be compassionate for patients is going to be fundamentally different than if we were to just say, go be compassionate to patients to improve our patient experience scores. So anyways, speak a little bit about that in terms of the power of compassion for each other and as a driver of healthcare culture to build resilience and durability in this really hard profession right now.
One of the things I said earlier is that the evidence points to the key to resilience being relationships. And so I'm a believer that if we do a good job taking care of each other, how we take care of patients will be just fine. So many times and I remember when I was training, you and I probably trained around the same time. There used to be places, academic medical centers that were known for being quote unquote malignant or toxic, where people didn't treat each other the right way. And that is a patient safety problem. That's those types of environments have serious clinical quality problems, and there are all sorts of effects to those in those type of workplaces. They take that chronic stress, they take it home with them, and it affects their families. If we do a good job taking care of each other and the better, deeper relationships that flow from that, that is a big step towards having that extend to the patient where the patient can feel it, because the patient can feel it when people aren't taking care of each other. There's tons of evidence behind that.
What's interesting, as we talk about different levels of compassion application and use as leaders for your teammates, and I think you get those two things right as you referenced, then we have the opportunity to do it for patients. One of the things that I'm really interested in for organizations that are interested in raising compassion, we want to become compassionate as leaders, compassionate for each other, compassionate for patients, and all the secondary downstream cultural, operational, clinical benefits, economic benefits. I mean, it's overwhelming. It's like a silver bullet, right? What do you see as the impact of developing people to apply compassion as a leader, as a teammate, as a frontline clinician? What's the role of human development in that journey?
A retired pastor friend of mine used to say to me, "What is it with you doctors?" He used to make a lot of sick visits in the hospital, and he used to say to me, "What is it with you doctors that you feel that you always need to fill the space with words? Like you're afraid of uncomfortable silence, like when you're delivering bad news to a patient, or it's a real tough time for a patient or family in the hospital." And he used to talk to me about the power of presence, and the power of presence and just being present for somebody when they're going through a hard time speaks volumes far beyond anything that could possibly come out of your mouth. Just being present for people. And he used to say to me, "I just like to sit with people in their suffering because that says so much more than I could ever say." And I think that's also true for colleagues that are going through tough times. Physicians specifically are trained often, or want to be a fixer. You want to fix stuff because that's your training. That's what you were trained to do. But so many times with colleagues, for example, you can't fix what's going on with them, whatever life circumstance they're facing, but you can be present for them. And what I've found, both in the people who are in my charge, but also in other leaders, uh, uh, in my experience, is that just developing people to be present for each other, because we often run away or get afraid to engage because we're afraid that we can't fix something. So why would I engage? People aren't looking for you to fix their problems because they often know you can't possibly fix it, whether it's on the home front, or maybe they just got a bad diagnosis, right? But you can be present with people. And there's a power there that I've used in my own leadership in the Department of Medicine here, and with colleagues. Um, Presence is something that I think that just the power of presence is something that I think that we can all learn a lot from.
It's interesting that what happens when a clinician tries something that can be a reflection of presence. And there may or may not be words associated with it, but it's a translation of "I am here for you.
Yeah,
I'm going to
it
be with you.
says,
I'm going to
"I'm
be with
here.
you. Yeah, I'm here."
I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And although I can't change the circumstances, you will not go through this alone."
Right. And if we could take the composite of that
Mhm.
and graft it into the mindset and language of care team members everywhere, Uh, Imagine the relief of suffering that patients could experience from that.
Hmm.
And per your research, my experience, your experience, and anybody that's ever delivered care, what it feels like to be that clinician. It is so deeply resonates with why we are here in the first place,
Yeah.
that when we live in accordance with our deepest held values and beliefs, that resonance is, many would say, the source of human joy. We are being who we know we should be in this life. I and it's so simple to do. And one of the other things that I found to be an amplifier of a cultural trait is to harvest stories from care team members to tell their story of your N of one, my N of one, and so many other N of one experiences of what has been your most extraordinary moment as a healer, and
Mm.
to allow them to tell the story of what that was like for them. And we can create a contagion, if you will, of compassion by having people tell their stories. So there's one final point that I want to ask you about that was in
Steve, I
Wonder.
just want to say I
Yeah,
love what you just said. I was just you hit the nail on the head. That's why we do this, right?
it is. And medicine is hard right now. And as we said at the beginning, that's a really accessible thing. We get to decide who we're going to be in this life. Our call. But
Totally.
one of the things is that you articulated in Wonder Drug was that there's a category of people called live to give. Right? There's a category of people live to give, which is really two domains. It's giving to others combined with self-interest.
Hmm.
Right? And there's other categories that are people who have low self-interest and low giving to others, meaning they don't care about themselves and they don't care about other people. And you categorize them as, do you remember what you categorize them as?
Well, they are. I forget which term made the final cut of the book because there was one that was not super nice in the first edition, but they don't care about anything. They're
Right.
apathetic.
You call that slouches.
Slouches. Yeah. Okay.
Slouches. That's okay. That's fair. The other one was uh, give only to self, but not give to others. And
Yeah,
that was
they're egomaniacs.
egomaniacs. And you also describe what their lives are like.
It's all about meism.
Right. It's meism, and they're frequently miserable, sick, anxious, and depressed.
Yeah. I
And
mean, more often than not.
more often than not, right. And the other one was giving only to others, but not giving to self.
It's a,
And you
we
you
we
re
call those doormats.
doormats, right?
Uh-huh.
And then you reference Bill Gates and his opinion is it's both. It's giving to others and it's having self-interest. Both are important in this journey. So when we say, how do we become compassionate? It's not about giving everything to everybody. It's about, who do I want to be and how do I want to contribute and how do I feel a sense of accomplishment and achievement through who I'm going to be for others. And I would love to hear
Sure.
your comments on that sort of partitioning of different personas.
So we curated the evidence that serving others has physical health effects, mental health effects, happiness and well-being, even professional success. But motives matter. So what the research shows is that in your own brain, if we were to do brain scans with functional MRI, different part of the brains light up when you have truly other oriented helping versus what I'll call strategic helping. So strategic helping is like give to get, and it's transactional, um, because you're giving because you know that it might benefit you, and a different part of your brain lights up. And we all know this experientially because we experience it differently when we're truly helping someone else versus trying to get something out of it. But that also explains why the physiological effects and the psychological effects go along with one form of helping, but not the other. So you can't even get the benefits if you're not authentically other oriented. You'll experience it differently in your brain, your physiology, and that's why it explains in part why it feels good to help people, but strategic helping and give to getting doesn't really feel good. And so one of the questions I'm often asked, which I think flows from what you were just asking, is what about overgive? Can you give too much? And so we do describe and the doormats, as we say, that just give relentlessly from themselves, but don't actually have any self care, and that is about boundaries to some extent, right? But boundaries is what makes giving and serving and helping and compassion sustainable. Sustainable. So people that don't have any boundaries sometimes struggle with that, and then they also don't have sustainable compassion for others because they've got nothing left to give. So the most effective givers, what we call live to givers, are the people who recognize that there's a benefit for themselves, but it's not their why. It's not the reason why they're helping and serving. It's just an unintended consequence or side effect or benefit that just goes along with helping and serving, but it's not the goal, if that makes sense. So we call those people live to givers because they'll just keep giving because they know it's beneficial to them. That's just not the reason why they do it.
It's so important. We've got tons of questions that have uh, come in through.
I'm looking at some of the questions here on my other screen.
Yeah, good thing we're going to have a 2-hour webinar, but some great questions here. Uh, One of the things that uh, that was a curiosity for me. Um, Somebody mentioned, telemedicine, and has telemedicine been covered? We haven't, but some of the work that we've really focused on is how do we, in a remote context, allow us to, do human connectivity and expression of compassion. And we have found in our experience, there is some additional challenges, but it's absolutely 100% doable in the context of remote care. And Steve, I would love to hear your comments on, can we do this in the context of remote care? Do we have that capacity?
You and I are connecting right now, aren't we?
There we go.
Yeah, it's perhaps not optimal for some things. There are certain discussions with patients or families or just with friends, with anybody that you wouldn't want to have via the medium. But but I think it's certainly possible.
Yeah, 100%. And uh, Steve, this has been so enlightening and affirming for me to hear from you. And again, I've said it again and again, and how important your passion and ambassadorship for kindness, caring, and compassion is, not only in healthcare, for patients, for communities, for care team members, for teammates, and for leaders, and the profound multi-channel benefit of compassion. And I'm just so appreciative that
Thank
um,
you.
that Maz tapped you on the shoulder to help look at this through the lens of a science nerd, to affirm what we qualitatively know, is
Yeah.
that compassion for patients, compassion for each other, compassion for anybody that we bump into in the world, may be the source code for a fulfilled, wonderful, amazing life. And it's pretty cool to be recipients of it as well. So,
And
uh,
I want to thank you because the pleasure's all mine. I also want to thank all these folks that are putting these awesome comments in the chat. It's fabulous. It made my day. So thank you guys for that.
Anyway, there's lots of wonderful conversations here. A couple of things before we we close, again, if you haven't read Compassionomics and Wonder Drug, do it. It's, you know, and Steve, you're a great writer. I don't know how much help you got, but it's so readable and it's so funny. I just found myself nodding and laughing if I wasn't like, wow, that's really compelling. It's really well put together.
Well,
So,
it's all mass.
oh yeah, he's a pretty funny guy. I've seen him interviewed. I haven't met him, but he's a very dynamic character, just like yourself. So.
I curate all the data and he tries to make it sound less nerdy. So
Okay, well, he's done a wonderful job, and you guys make a great dyad, making a difference in the world. A couple of announcements. I want to let people know Andro is going to put a a link in the chat. We are taking practicing excellence is going on the road a little bit, and we're doing regional workshops around activating local leaders. We have a strong bias that how organizations are led has profound impact on engagement, the well-being of teams, the capacity for executing change. And so we have these really cool local workshops that we're doing on how is it that we activate our local leaders. So if you have an interest in that, we're traveling around in different regions of the country. We're going to be in San Francisco next week. So click on that link and you'll have an opportunity to sign up if that's of interest to you. And in summary, again, thank you, Stephen, for being here with me today and for affirming everything that I've observed in the world, that kindness to others and patients is the best medicine we have to live an amazing clinical life of impact and purpose. So
thanks so
thank you,
much.
my friend. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody, for being a part of this clinical life, and we are out.